morning and welcome to Rising. We have another excellent show for you today. We're proceeding along with this first week in 2024, having a lot of fun as we go about it, aren't we?
Always, Robby. Always.
So much fun. All right, take it away.
Well, former President Donald Trump has formally appealed Maine Secretary of State Shenna Bellows' ruling to bar him from the state's 2024 primary ballot. Trump's appeal to Kennebec County Superior Court kicks off a speedy timeline. A judge will have to either approve or reject Bellows' decision within 20 days of its being issued, which was December 28th. Now, depending on appeals in this case and in Colorado, whose state Supreme Court originally established precedent to ban Trump from the ballot, we could see the issue kicked all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has never ruled on the meaning of the 14th Amendment insurrection ban. Now, the woman at the center of all of this, Shenna Bellows, was forced to answer to the political implications of her ruling in a CNN interview yesterday. Let's tune in.
Do you have any concern taking Trump off the ballot risks tearing the country apart?
My duty under Maine election law and the Constitution and the oath I swore to the Constitution was to look exclusively at the hearing and the evidence before me and make a decision based on the law. Neither political considerations nor personal considerations for my safety could enter into that decision. I had a duty and an obligation to follow the Constitution, as do all of us who serve in government.
Now, as the Trump legal team wages war on the boss's issues with the law, the former president's campaign crew is continuing full steam ahead on another front, the 2024 election. Trump told Breitbart News yesterday he was thinking of renting out Madison Square Garden in New York City for a general election rally sometime next year. Trump also told the outlet he's considering rallies in New York, New Jersey, Virginia, New Mexico, and Minnesota in an effort to expand the MAGA map to areas that have not traditionally been friendly to him in the past. So continuing to follow these legal developments for Donald Trump. I was reading that, and we should keep in mind that, although we're mostly talking about how this would impact the general election, what the legal issues are actually still over the primary. Ballots have to be printed for those primaries, I think for both of them soon, so that people who need absentee ballots, like military service people, can get their ballots in time. So that actually has to start up real soon. So it's interesting, if you think, well, yes, the actual election, the Trump versus Biden theoretically election, is still some ways away. There is some urgency to whether Trump's going to be on the ballot or not for these primaries.
Yeah, there is. There's also the discussion about whether or not people could do write-in campaigns. And so in that case, you could, if it turns out that Shenna Bellows was wrong and you do have a right to vote for Donald Trump, that he's not banned by the 14th Amendment. Currently, these bans would mean that even write-in votes wouldn't be counted. So correct. Right. You don't want to put someone at a disadvantage and say they have to rely on a write-in ballot. But even if they were precluded from actually being on the ballot, you still would have at least that possibility if these rulings in Maine and Colorado were in fact overturned. So that is something. It's also worth noting, although, again, this is not an excuse if in fact it's not legally held up to have done something like this with such a clear kind of political valence to it. But it is also true that these are both states where that Donald Trump did not win in 2020, that he does not need to win in order to win the presidency. So the stakes are lower in that respect. But again, that doesn't really get to the core kind of substantive, kind of moral and political arguments that are being made around this. Right.
And, theoretically, he could make it competitive in those states, right? There's nothing there's nothing ordained by the laws of nature or God that Colorado and Maine have to be places that it actually isn't Maine one of those places that gives its electoral votes splits them up, and because I thought he did pick up one of those.
I'm not sure.
Last time. I thought that's the case. I could be wrong. Correct me if that's inaccurate. What did you make of what Bellows had to say there? Look, I get it. I don't think I'm not out here saying that it is totally crazy to, on a strictly legal, technical way, interpret the 14th Amendment to mean that Trump is disqualified. I'm not. Obviously, smart legal people have looked at it and reached that conclusion,
including conservatives.
Including some ostensible conservatives. It's more, what that means. Which is the thrust of the question, what that means for democracy and the fabric of the country if, based on what is sort of a technicality, people, would not be able to vote for the candidate who is by all accounts, leading right now in a general election matchup ahead of Biden and RFK Jr. Somewhat behind that. So I understand her saying that, like, look, I have to just look at, the law. It was interesting. She referenced her personal safety. I guess I know she was she's received, I'm sure, a gazillion death threats, and I think was swatted as well. That's something. Actually, Marjorie Taylor Greene was swatted, and another Republican were swatted over the weekend. There's been a number of those kinds of things lately. But
right, and it's dangerous and bad.
It's very bad.
It was very dangerous of her being swatted.
Well, sure, regardless of who is the target of it or the political,
I actually think that, who was it, Wolf Blitzer asking her that question? It was a very bad question. If the law precludes you from running for president, regardless of whether that splits the country up, you have to follow the Constitution. There's very good reasons for people who committed an insurrection to not be president of the United States of America. The problem is whether or not she was able to make that factual determination without a trial, without a finding of actual fact. That is exactly what's going on with all of these insurrection cases that are midstream. And it does feel like that's a premature decision. But asking whether, in the abstract, the 14th Amendment should ever be applied seems to be completely wrongheaded. Why? Because you'll get a bad result. There are many legal results that people object to, but you have to follow the letter of the Constitution. If a 13-year-old ran for president, nobody would be asking, well, would it be wrong to ban them from the ballot if they're really, really popular? No, that's not how these things work. And I do think it's really irresponsible, frankly, for journalists to be framing it that way, as opposed to getting to the substantive issue here, which is, did Donald Trump, in fact, participate in an insurrection?
Right. And are his actions, even if you think they're bad and might violate some law and he's legally going to be liable, do they constitute an insurrection?
Right.
Do they contain is violence necessary? Is the seizing of arms? Is the argumentarian necessary for that kind of thing?
And that line of questioning would have been more interesting from her.
Which distinguishes it from the, are you 35 yet? Where were you born kind of question, which I think most people would realize are more objective. Although there was some, right? Wasn't there debate over, like, John McCain was born in the did you hear with the Panama Canal Zone or something like that? And so there actually was question. But again, in that case, it would have been, if it was ambiguous, it would have been weird for an election official, an unelected bureaucrat type person to just unilaterally disqualify him on behalf of all Americans without any kind of evidentiary hearing, trial,
and
proceeding.
Obviously, we had a great deal of debate about whether or not Hawaii counted as America for the benefit of Barack Obama.
Right. Well, and if some Republican official acting on that totally wrong slur had taken him off the ballot, I think people would have objected to that.
Right. Well, we don't want to miss this news item. A man entered and opened fire in the Colorado Supreme Court on Tuesday night. The man apparently stole a gun from a police officer guarding the building. The suspect was arrested and no one was hurt. Investigators confirmed a high probability that the event was not related to the Colorado Supreme Court's decision.
Interesting. They must have made somebody else mad, too.
I suppose so. We'll follow up on that story as more details emerge.
Political violence, always bad. Don't do it. Always good to tamp down, let cooler heads prevail, because violence never solves anything. More Rising right after this.